So, welcome to Lore Night 10. We're going to be talking about Sylvanas Windrunner, which we all know, maybe as the Banshee Queen, the Dark Lady, the zombie bitch who burned down the tree, a couple different names. But before she became the Dark Lady, she used to be a Ranger General of the High Elven Kingdom of Kel'Thalas. Um, she was a prominent member of the Windrunner family, and she has two sisters. She is in the middle of her sisters. So her older sister is Illyria, the younger sister is Varisa, and she also has a brother named Lyrith. I think that's how you pronounce that. So prior to the Second War, Sylvanas had very much the reputation of a cunning ranger, a fearless warrior. Um, she had been embroiled in the conflict that the High Elves had with the trolls of the Amani Empire. Um, and kind of a cool thing to note is a short period before the Second War, she was the one who actually admitted the highly talented ranger known as Nathanos Maris. Nathanos Maris would become Nathanos Blightcaller during the Third War when Arthas killed him. So Sylvanas admitted Nathanos Maris into the ranks of the Farstriders. This was basically the High Elf Spec Ops unit. There were a ton of people that contested that because prior to this point it had strictly been elves. However, Nathanos ended up being quite the talented ranger with them, and his tactics actually led to quite a few victories that the Farstriders would have. So, during the Third War, she would valiantly defend her home against the Scourge, and then eventually Arthas and the Scourge. She did, unfortunately, as we know, fall to his hand, and instead of being granted the swift death that she requested, Arthas would instead rip her soul out and cause her to become a banshee. She was forced at that point to kill her own people and slaughter the remainder of the resistance in Kel'Thalas as Arthas took control of the city and used the Sunwell to resurrect Kel'Thuzad. Those who are familiar with the Arthas lore night that we did a couple weeks ago, you're probably gonna, recognize a lot of these events. These two characters are very intertwined, at least in the first half of the game. So she would serve as Arthas's more or less trophy of, I've conquered Kel'Thalas, I've taken their greatest warrior, and I've, forced her to submit to my will. And she was one of the generals that he left in charge of Lordaeron while he would move on to his campaign in Kalimdor. Under his control, she would assist in the purging of Lordaeron, going around to the surviving villages, killing the people, driving them to the mountains where other Scourge lie in wait, and basically just making sure that Lordaeron was purged, more or less. So eventually, Arthas's connection with the Lich King would fade, and his control over the Scourge and the Undead would weaken, eventually to the point where Sylvanas and a majority of her banshees were able to break free from Arthas's control. So the other Dreadlords from the Legion noticed that this was occurring and decided to kind of team up with Sylvanas in order to overthrow Arthas and take control of the Scourge. She agreed to help, and with the assistance of her banshees, she actually recovered her physical body, which had been locked in an iron coffin as kind of like a tease till Sylvanas, further torturing her. So she would lie in wait outside of Lordaeron, while the Dreadlords would ambush and kill Arthas when he came back. If they did not succeed, she would use her banshees to bring him in more of a secluded place in the woods. This actually ended up happening. Kind of got him there. She shot him with an arrow that had been coated in a special paralysis poison that she made, and when Arthas just told her like, "Oh, just hurry up and kill me," she's like, "Ha, try again. That's what I told you when you didn't do that." So she was actually going to butcher Arthas. Um, However, unfortunately, she took too much time. Kel'Thuzad intervened and saved Arthas, chased Sylvanas away, and killed quite a few of her banshees. So after this moment, she would go on to find other undead that had actually also managed to break free of Arthas's control. She formed the Splinter faction that would later be known as the Forsaken, and she would use these forces, at this point a very small force that she had to oppose Arthas. So at this point, Arthas had left for Northrend, having been recalled by the Lich King in order to merge with him and then kind of just become the singular Lich King. Kel'Thuzad went into hiding. So Sylvanas and a large majority of the Scourge kind of had been freed at this point. However, obviously there's still undead and zombies and or banshees. So the Dreadlord Varimathras came to her and said, hey, me and the other Dreadlords, we're going to try to, get control of the Scourge again. However, she kind of was really hesitant to join them, seeing as she just literally gained her full freedom. And kind of basically told him to F off, more or less. So warned her that, if you don't come with us, we're going to come for you. However, she still was adamant in saying, go screw yourself. I'm going to do my own thing. But at that point, she realized, yeah, they are probably going to try to attack me and remove me, so she needed to acquire a larger army than what she already had. At this point, she only had banshees and a smattering of lesser undead. So in the Plague Lands, she would actually use her banshees in order to try to force other races to cooperate. So she used the banshees to possess Mugthol, who is the leader of the ogres there, a bandit lord named Blackthorn, the Knoll ruler in the area called Snarlmane, and the Murloc Puddle Lord. Just very threatening. And so with kind of these allies being possessed and being basically tricked into helping Sylvanas, Varimathras in his attack it faltered, it failed very quickly. However, before Sylvanas was able to kill him, he said, hey, actually, how about I serve you instead? Seeing as I know where all of my fellow Dreadlords, I know their tactics, I know where their bases are, I know everything about them, I can help you, defeat them, and you can gain control. So she was hesitant trusting him, but eventually felt that, yeah, I do kind of need that knowledge and that help. So a fellow Dreadlord named Deathrlock had a human, basically under his control, named Garithos. Garithos was one of the highest ranking survivor of Lordaeron at this point, and basically the leader of the Alliance resistance within Lordaeron. So he was using these people to protect himself and kind of mask where he was. So Sylvanas possessed his scouts, infiltrated his base, and basically killed a lot of the men that were there. Not all of them, but a large majority of them. At this point, Sylvanas had kind of disabled most of the Deathlock's forces, and coming into contact with Deathlock and killed him. So Garithos at this point became freed, and while Sylvanas kind of wanted to kill him and saw him as foolish and arrogant, she felt that she could use him and whatever remained of his men in order to help killing the greater Dreadlord Balnazzar. So she ventured on with her forces on to the capital city itself of Lordaeron. Um, so she had Garithos attack from the rear entrance with his men, and Valimathras and Sylvanas came in from the front. As they move kind of throughout the city, Sylvanas, found kind of caches of weapons and things and gave them to her loyal undead and kind of used them to help further the assault. Eventually, Balnazzar's forces were destroyed, and kind of Balnazzar was at her mercy. And in a final test of loyalty, she had Valimathras kill Balnazzar, and this is significant because it was actually forbidden for the Nathrazim, which is the race of the Dreadlords, to kill each other. However, kind of forced her to do it. Or forced him to do it. So Valimathras struck down Balnazzar, and whether or not this was planned or not, no one's really sure, but he would eventually later reemerge as kind of corrupting the leader of the Scarlet Crusade. We went over that in the Paladin Lore Night, which was a little while ago. I actually don't have a recording because that's pre when I started doing recordings. But I'm sure we'll do a Scarlet Crusade, more dedicated lore night in the future. Valimathras was also ordered to kill Garithos at this point, which, is a minor plot detail, but yeah, Sylvanas is a bit of a bitch there. She's like, just kill everyone. So at this point, she had gained complete control over Lordaeron, and she had kind of an empire at this point, a city, a kingdom. She renamed the capital city of Lordaeron to the Undercity and took it over in the name of the Forsaken. So, later on, Sylvanas realized she needed allies in order to survive. She initially tried to do a little bit of probing into whether or not the Alliance would accept them, quickly found out this was not going to be the case. Alliance was super duper against undead. In fact, many members of her faction were being hunted and killed by members of the Alliance, so she kind of backed away from that. She would eventually send envoys over to the Horde. Someone significant in helping that was an Tauran archdruid named Hamul Rune Totem. He saw potential in a redemption for Sylvanas' people and helped convince Thrall that while they're undead, while they're the Scourge, while they're more or less the enemy that we've been fighting for so long, I think that there's potential with them. And so they more or less entered a alliance or an agreement of convenience. The Horde would gain a city, a stronghold within the Eastern Kingdoms near where the Alliance was, and the Forsaken would gain closer allies. Unfortunately, even still at this point, Sylvanas and her people were largely mistrusted by other members of the Horde. Like I said, prior to just them being the Scourge, and later during Wrath of the Lich King, the Wrathgate incident, which involved deployment of the Plague against both the Horde and the Alliance. So during the Burning Crusade, Sylvanas was one of the primary proponents of having the newfound Blood Elves joining the Horde, seeing as she used to be a High Elf, which, they became the Blood Elves. So, evidence, obviously she still had quite a bit of love for her former people, and, um, eventually they did join the Horde, and the elves were, happy to have done that, and they were happy to kind of have that alliance with them, and so they allowed Forsaken soldiers to actually be stationed on some of their lands that they held. It was a very small percentage of them, but they were there. Cute and Psycho, I see your mic lighten up. I hear some sounds occasionally coming through. Um, if you can, mute yourself. If I continue to hear little blips from you, I will server mute. Don't mean to sound like a dick, but I just want to maintain everyone's, I guess, indulgence in this. So, during Wrath of the Lich King, we're going to talk a little bit about the Wrathgate event that I had talked about prior. They began their assault on Angrathar the Wrathgate. An uprising actually broke out within the Undercity shortly after Apothecary Putris deployed the Plague during the Wrathgate incident, which killed a lot of Horde and a lot of Alliance, and everyone was genuinely pissed. This was because Putris, he was in league with the Valley Mathras and the other Royal Apothecary. They were attempting a coup, and they were going to try to kill Sylvanas and take over the Undercity for themselves. She managed to escape the coup and fled to Orgrimmar. She rallied Thrall and Vol'jin and even members of the Alliance at this point, which were also pretty pissed at her. She kind of was like, no, this isn't me. There are people trying to overthrow me. So Varian Wrynn actually offered to come in there and help. He was still really mad at her, but kind of stepped in and said, hey, I'll help you. So, with Thrall, Vol'jin, and Varian, she led an assault into the Undercity. She eventually fought and killed Valley Mathras and retook her throne, whereas Varian launched more of an attack from the sewers, and there he found and ended up killing Apothecary Putris. So, kind of back now over in Northrend, now that this event had been dealt with, she actually broke into Icecrown Citadel, and where she was going to attempt to steal Frostmourne from Arthas. She failed in doing so, but while she may have failed, during a point where she got really, really close to Frostmourne and stealing it, the spirit and the soul of Uther the Lightbringer, which his soul had been residing in Frostmourne because Arthas had killed him with it. She learned from him that the only true way to kill the Lich King was to actually do it at the Frozen Throne, where he was more or less born. Arthas would eventually fall, as we know, to Tyrion Vordring and adventurers from both the Horde and Alliance, depending on what side you were on when you killed Arthas for the first time. Sylvanas was actually not present for this, and it's not entirely known why. There isn't really any firm evidence of where she might have been during this time. In my opinion, it might have been she thought she wasn't going to be much of an asset in case, she went in there and then Arthas tried to control her, which with her, still being undead, he totally had the capability to do so. And maybe she thought she was more of a liability. I'm really not sure. It's not really said at all, even in the expanded novels and anything, where she was at during this time. So after the death of Arthas, um, she eventually would once again venture to the Frozen Throne, um, and she took solace in the fact that even though she wasn't there, um, her purpose had finally been complete. She finally got revenge on Arthas for all the things that he had done to her and her people. So at this point, we're kind of crossing into this may or may not be canon. I like to think it's canon because it does fit really well with her character. But this section is from, I think it's Edge of Night, which is a book. So basically, Sylvanas saying that, I've done my job, I've completed my goals, and now I think it's time to go. And she, um, got ready to basically throw herself off of the side of the citadel onto the Serenite spikes below, which is significant. It was the only thing really capable of. She just wanted to be destroyed at that point. 9 Valkyr, which are like basically like warrior angels, if we want to call them that. They basically tried to convince her, hey, don't do this, but she ignored them and she threw herself off. So when she hit the bottom, eventually she would see visions of her people's future. Unfortunately, without her leadership at this point, the bulk of the Forsaken was actually going to be used by Garrosh Hellscream in a failed assault on Gilneas, which he had been eyeing up during this time. I think we're kind of just now approaching the edge of where Cataclysm is beginning. So, and in a kind of a horrible image, rather than face the onslaught and rather be basically used as fodder, she actually saw her own people throwing themselves into fire. They would rather burn to death on their own terms than basically be used as shields for, the living troops. So during this vision, she found herself floating in a dark void. She only knew hopelessness, fear, regret, and terror. And she basically was like, I don't want this for my people. And eventually the Valkyr would visit her again in this vision. And they would use or sacrifice one of themselves in order to bring Sylvanas back from the dead, in order to continue the fight with the Forsaken. So, imbued with a newbound spirit, she ventured to Silverpine Forest, where Garrosh was there preparing the assault on Gilneas, and said, if you're going to use my troops, my people, you're going to use them in the way that I want you to use them. Garrosh was a little opposed to this, but eventually realized the support would be nice, and opted to allow her to kind of do things her way. So her tactic was to bring her fleet around the southern coast to harass villages, split the guard into two, and hopefully weaken them. This tactic would actually eventually give success to her. She was able to wrestle control of Gilneas. However, she did not anticipate the Gilneans actually being able to use the Worgen Curse to their advantage, and they would later take back the city. So now we're fully into the Mist of Pandaria at this point, I think. But she was notably opposed to attacking Theramore. She was opposed to the siege of Theramore, obviously the mana bombing, everything like that. Mostly due to her fear of a counterattack being aimed at the Undercity, or even Kel'Thalas. Obviously she still has the connection there. Um, she was completely dismissed by Garrosh, saying, if there's a counterattack, you can handle it. You'll be fine. And went on to do it anyway. So later in the expansion, we see her assisting Lothamar in the seizing of Bladefist Bay. Um, Something that she actually planned to do was raise the fallen soldiers, resurrect them in order to have them keep fighting. However, Lothamar was like, nah, don't do that, at least not to my troops. He specifically said, don't do it to Blood Elven troops, didn't mention anything else, but it's unknown if she was actually successful in doing this or actually ended up doing anything. So, yeah, that's more or less what happened there. She wasn't super duper involved in Warlords of Draenor. I think we see her a couple times just doing some side plot stuff. I didn't really find it much of it worthy of being included. So, now we're going to step into Legion territory. So during the initial Battle of Bergen Shore, she fought alongside Varian in the approach and during the landing. However, when they were split and Vol'jin was eventually mortally wounded, she made the call to have the Horde retreat, mostly fearing the death of other leadership within the Horde, and obviously further losses from the Horde at this point. They were already pretty broken. Their leader just got stabbed, and so she was afraid of them breaking and running anyway. So better to have a more organized retreat. Later, she was named as Vol'jin's successor, as his final act of war chief before he died. So later, we see Sylvanas taking the Forsaken fleet to Stormheim. She was attempting to get the Aegis of Agramar. I think that's how it's pronounced. I'm really not sure. And so she was kind of deterred by this. There was an Alliance gunship that kind of swooped in and began attacking. This was done by, again, Greymane and Sky Admiral Rogers, who had actually been following Sylvanas at this point, kind of not really trusting what she was doing. So she left Nathanos there in order to defend the fleet, and then she kind of ran away, more or less. So we later see her in Helheim, trying to make a deal with Helia. She kind of fails in doing this and takes a small contingent of her personal troops, the Dark Rangers, to go to try to take the Vykrul city by force. They are eventually repelled at that point, and she is trying to get into the vault there, and eventually she reveals that she intends to subjugate Ire, which is the basically the god or the goddess of the Vykrul and the Valkyr more specifically. She wants to enslave them, make more Valkyr for the Forsaken, because they need Valkyr in order to resurrect themselves, since Forsaken can't really repopulate by normal means. She is thwarted by, again, Greymane at this point. She was trying to use the soul cage to bind Ire there, and again, Greymane confronts her at this point. So, at this point, she was even though Ire had escaped because of the interference with Gen, Sylvanas said she fully intended to pursue gathering more Valkyr. So now, the next time we majorly see her is during the opening events of Battle for Azeroth, which is kind of like the big event um, where she planned on burning or capturing the World Tree Teldrassil, however, eventually results in her burning it. This was very, very much contested by uh, Saurfang. I'm sure other members of the Horde, even Nathanos, was a little surprised when she was like, burn it. Um, he complied, I guess, just due to out of loyalty, or I'm really not sure where this is going, but I'm along here for the ride. During the Alliance offensive, for the Battle of the Undercity, she would defend her home there. However, being sufficiently pushed back by the Alliance, cornered in her throne room, she had a last-minute plan, and that was to detonate plague bombs within the city and render it completely unusable for both the Alliance and the Horde. Basically, if you can't have it, I can't have it. She escaped with the other Horde leadership there and fled. So, so far we haven't really seen much of her. There is murmurings that she is in Zandalar working some backdoor deals. Not really sure there. So enter kind of like the last section here. Just some one or two fun facts. So Sylvanas hails Hollow's End as like the official Forsaken holiday. She says it's the night where the Forsaken are the strongest and where their enemies fear them the most. So she appears in a ghostly form outside of Undercity and burns a large Wicker Man, which is kind of like their Wicker Man festival, and it celebrates the anniversary of the Forsaken's campaign against the Burning Legion and the Scourge, and the birth of the Forsaken as a people. And another fun fact, it is believed, never really confirmed, but believed, that Sylvanas had, when she was living, and might still have some form of romantic relationship with Nathanos, seeing as she was the one who personally let him into the Ranger Corps, despite the protests of basically everybody else there, and still holds him close in terms of one of her most trusted friends and allies and counsel. Thank you for listening to Lore Night 10 by Kel, the Lore Keeper in the Order of the Righteous Guild on US Dalaran. I hope to join you next week with some more lore topics.